Welcome back to Haircuts, everyone. So this is not the Trans Am. We have been working on the Trans Am. We're waiting on some parts to come in, and so while we're waiting for those parts to come in, we started working on the tractor. First order of business on this is to get it cranked over. The insurance plate was on here, so someone was actually driving it last year, but since we haven't seen it turn over and run, we need to make sure that we can crank it over before we start working on the carb and all that sort of thing. First order of business. There's no battery right there, so we gotta go pick up a new battery. So right now we're gonna go get that battery. We're back from the store. We've got our new battery, 6-volt battery, and this is a 640 cold cranking amps, so that'll be plenty well needed for the winter, even though we won't use that then. We probably won't even use this at all. But so what's interesting about this battery, not this battery actually, this tractor, is that it has a positive ground. So normally on a car, on vehicles that you're used to, the body, the chassis, that'll be your negative. And in this case, on older trucks, older tractors, it's actually the reverse. So you have the positive will hook up to what would normally be the ground strap for the body, and then the negative lead will go to your starter. So what we're gonna do now is gonna pop this in here, and then we're gonna figure out a way how to hotwire this thing, because in true Haircuts fashion, we don't have any key for this thing. So we're gonna get to it. Let's go. All right, so here we go. You see that we've got the battery in place, and right here is the negative terminal, and it is going over here right to the starter. Okay, and so it's going right to the starter. On the other side which is the positive terminal, it's connected to that ground strap right there, and it's going straight to the frame. And we don't really need to hotwire this, because the way that it works is you push this button right here in order to crank it. It's in neutral, and I'm just going to press this button and see what happens. So as you can hear, it's trying to crank, but on the flywheel side something's jammed up. So with these old tractors, sometimes they just get gummed up from sitting around. What we're going to do is we're going to take those plugs out in case there's too much compression in there, and then we're going to try cranking it again and then see what happens. So let's get to it. We're making a little bit more headway here, and we're starting to figure things out. Right here we've got the oil is like a pre-oiler, so that's why you have an oil level here. So you have your air that would come in through here, and then you got the oil, your pre-oil in here. What we noticed in here is that there was water in here, and that water built a bit of sludge that was in there. This is where the oil filter is. We took the oil filter out. It looks like a big toilet paper roll. It's actually pretty funny, but we couldn't really tell if there's any water in that part. But what we're starting to notice, we took the cap off the radiator, and the radiator is bone dry, but the first two cylinders have antifreeze, and it's clearly antifreeze because you can tell it's green. So it's not like it's just water that came in. Now, the way the radiator gets the water into the engine here is if you come around from behind me. So here's the upper rad hose. This comes from the top of the radiator. It comes over here into the manifold here. This is the temperature sensor. You got this cast iron pipe here, tubing, and then the water is going directly right here into the head. That's where it's bolted in here, and then from there it must flow down lower. From here, we've got this crossover pipe that comes over to what could be the thermostat, and then off of that you got the lower rad hose that goes back into the radiator over there. What we think has happened here is either that there's a crack in one of the lines in the head, or there's a crack in the block, which has resulted in coolant getting into those first two cylinders. Because if you look, you can clearly see like the level of coolant is right up to the top there. So there shouldn't be any coolant in there at all, and there definitely shouldn't be that much. So normally on an old tractor like this, when it's not cranking, it's not firing up, what you would do is you take the plugs off, and if it's seized, you'd fill it up with kerosene. Kerosene it's like an oil, but it's also like it's an oil, but you can ignite it. But people use it for soaking things that are rusted to break them loose. So what people would do is they'd fill all those 4 cylinders with kerosene, and that would sort of penetrate through the rings that would be rusted, and then over a period of 3 or 4 days, it would sort of make its way through, loosen up all the rust, and then you would go to the front and then grab that crank with like a big wrench or like a ratchet if you get a socket on there, and then try to break it loose. But in this case, since these cylinders are full of water, you'd have to get the water out first, and then you'd fill it with kerosene to loosen everything up, and then we can get around to trying to get it to crank over. So this is a lot more work than we originally thought. So we're going to go back and sort of decide whether we are going to proceed with this project or if we're just going to leave it as a lawnmower where it's sitting right here. So that's where we are right now, and then we're going to take a few more stabs on this to see if we can break something out quickly. Got this fluid extraction tool here. I'm going to try sucking out the fluid out of those cylinders. Cylinder was almost entirely antifreeze, like it was very, very bright green. The second cylinder was a bit murky. The cylinders 3 and 4, those look pretty dry, but we're just going to check. 1.5 liters of fluid out of the block, out of the cylinders, and that definitely should not have been in there. What we notice is the first cylinder was the most green, so it was really a lot of the actual antifreeze that was in the first cylinder, and as we got towards the 4th cylinder, it was more watery. Not sure why that is, but we can dig into that some other time. What we're going to do is, because this is not really that important of a project, it was just something that we were doing for fun, and what we're going to do is we've got kerosene right here. We're going to not fill up, but we're going to pour kerosene into each of those 4 cylinders, because whether it's us or someone else down the line that's going to try to get this tractor going, we want to make sure that those rings aren't seized and that the block isn't made useless. So we're just going to put some kerosene in there to make sure that everything's lubed up, break that rust loose on those piston rings, and then at least that way when someone does get around to whether it's us or somebody else, that it's easy enough for them to get into the job without having to spend days or weeks trying to basically get the engine to unseize. Okay, so we're just going to fill this kerosene up. Kerosene that was in here, not all of this wasn't full, it was only partially full. So we've taken the kerosene that was out of here, we put it into the blocks, we put it into the block, into the 4 cylinders, and we've also sort of put it through the head where the push rods were, where the springs were, to sort of keep the valves and everything like that lubricated a little bit as much as we can. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just button everything up and leave this thing exactly where it was, and we're going to go back into the shop and just do some work on the Trans Am. Now you may be wondering, what was I doing with all of the radiator fluid that was coming out of here, and I was going over there to do something? What I was actually doing is I was putting in a container. One of our neighbors has a couple of dogs that bark all day, and we were actually just going to go put it over by their fence. That's a joke, don't do that. It's not the pet's fault that it's barking. So what we're actually doing is we're taking that, we're going to put it into green jello, and then we're going to give that to them. Alright, so we're going to get back to the tractor here, put it all back together, and then we'll catch you all next time.